And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Bear with me this week, folks. I've got the same terrible cold that all of you do too. So we'll do a few cuts to our guest in a few moments, and if you hear some terrible hacking, don't worry about it. We'll be fine. So it's been a tumultuous week here in Little Rhode Island, not the least of which started when on the mean streets of Bristol Warren there appears to have arisen a, well, as the late great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci would have said, a frittata. I'm going to go and allow my guest, who I'm about to reintroduce, to go into the real details of it. But it would appear, at least at a superficial level, that the teaching community at Kickamuit Middle School in Bristol, Rhode Island, part of the Bristol Warren School District, had simply had enough. There are clearly a number of factors being pointed to, but essentially the behavior was so completely out of control at the school level during the school day that teachers felt threatened and teachers were no longer comfortable in the classroom. Joining me, someone who is, as we lovingly say, a repeat offender here at the Coalition. Full disclosure, he's one of my best friends. He's the sponsor of the show. He has run for political office in the same organization that I have. He's a local business owner and a committed family man right in the heart of the Warren section of the Warren-Bristol School District. And in that's the capacity he'll be speaking in tonight. Both he and I are not looking at this issue, if you will, through the prism of politics. We're simply looking to education, discipline issues, management issues. All right, maybe we will look at it a little bit through the prism of what's clearly an out-of-control school system. But the critical point here is, how do you take a middle-class school district with touches of upper middle class and some really solid working folks communities and turn this into what appears to be, and we call it here at the Coalition an onion issue, as we dig underneath layer and layer and layer and layer, what appears to be hell on wheels. Darrell Gould, welcome back to the Coalition.
Thank you very much, Pat.
All right, so let's start with a little bit of Bristol Warren history, because some of the people who are going to watch this now or in the future are not going to be as immersed and as folks in town are.
Certainly.
And it's interesting because having spent a couple of years now involved, on the periphery of politics in the East Bay, I've come to realize what a close-knit community this is, and that's probably an overstatement. The upside of that is you've got wonderful families who have been there for generations, folks who have joined the community and providing a level of reinvigoration in the commercial district. You've got the prospect, at least, for some wonderful schools. You've got a manufacturing base, an entertainment industry base there, great little downtowns, the historic, sometimes the hysterical, but at the same time, all the underpinnings of what should be really a premier community here in New England. And I'm not looking at that from a monetary sense, but the overall quality of life. Direct waterfront access, an arts district growing up right around you. Again, the history, the architecture, it really, for all intents and purposes, is a wonderful place, but it should be more of a wonderful place, probably, shouldn't it? So, give us a little history of the district in general, because folks, I think, are just coming to understand that Bristol Warren are tied at the hip. A little bit about how that came about and how things work now.
Sure. So the Bristol Warren Regional School District obviously is comprised of Bristol and the towns of Bristol and Warren. The school was actually regionalized about 30 years ago in an effort to save money. There were actually some financial incentives that are no longer available to us that were given to us for a period of time for regionalizing. And there, obviously, with that came some changes as far as infrastructure and where the students are housed. So as far as how the district is set up, there are a variety of small elementary schools. The largest elementary school in the district does reside in Warren, that is Hugh Cole Elementary. The middle school for the entire district is Kickapoo Middle School, which is the school that caught a lot of press over the last week or so. And then we have Mount Hope High School is the only high school in the district. So for the most part, the elementary schools will service, there are elementary schools that service only Bristol kids. And Warren, the only elementary school, again, is Hugh Cole, and that actually serves a combination of Bristol and Warren. Now, the district, Warren and Bristol are definitely very different towns. As someone who I grew up on the Bristol side of the line, and obviously now I live in Warren, been there for the better part of the last 14 years. And there's definitely some differences between the towns from a socioeconomic standpoint, median income, all of that stuff are, there's definitely some differences between the towns. Bristol being more affluent, Warren again being on having more people, on lunch assistance, which is really the tool the state uses to determine, what the need-based funding comes into it. So all of this really came about when it actually started. It's been going on for a while. For about the last 18 months, the teachers have been very active in voicing their concerns about safety issues in the schools. And they approached the administration in the school district. They voiced their concerns. And the trend that we see in our district is, coming from administration anyway, is there appears to be a lot of conflict resolution tactics. You never apologize for anything. You speak at the 30,000-foot level. You don't commit to anything. And there's always talk about plans being put into place, and ultimately nothing ever comes to fruition. So after about 18 months, the teachers union decided to have a coordinated sick out. So I believe there was somewhere in the neighborhood of high 20s, low 30s number of teachers who called out sick. This happened, the sick out was actually last Friday, so a week ago today. As a parent, I received notice, it's around 10:30 p.m. on Thursday evening, that school would be canceled on Friday due to an excessive number of adult illnesses. Then, one way or another, media got a hold of it, and people realized that it was actually not just a coincidental illness, and there's a lot of stuff, as you're experiencing, going around right now. And so this wasn't just a happenstance situation. This was a coordinated effort on behalf of the union to bring some attention to the issues at the school. That said, now I fully support the actions of the school, the teachers rather, in this matter. This was not a knee-jerk reaction. This was not something that was done as a first dart, for lack of a better term. They'd really tried to work with the district to get some of these disciplinary issues handled and move forward. So the instances that the teachers brought up, there's been an escalation in poor behavior, and this is, boiled over to the point where teachers have started to get injured, and there are fights on a fairly regular basis. Ultimately, what this boils down to is a lack of discipline and enforcement of the district's discipline policies. And if you walk it back, it's very easy to kind of figure out how this came to be. And it's multifaceted. I think the knee-jerk reaction from everybody is really to try to point the finger at one group of people. And so, those of us who've been involved in education, and as you know, Pat, I've tried to be an advocate for families in the district when it comes to curriculum-based activities, education-based activities, IEPs, discipline, bullying, things along those lines. So as someone who's kind of been involved for the last few years, I know that a large portion of the blame lies with the administration. I'm also fully aware that there's been a change in culture with how we deal with our schools. And I mean, a perfect example is, when I was a student, if I had done something wrong, I'd get called into the principal's office with my parents, and it was oftentimes the parents and the principal, or whoever the authority figure is, kind of working together to get me under control or discipline me or whatever the case may be, help me with with academics. And there's been this shift because everybody's so protective of their children that no parent wants to see other people disciplining their kids, and some parents are very loose with their discipline themselves. So ultimately, what's happened is, in part, you have the home aspect of it. Now, this is also, there's going to be varying degrees of this based upon the home life of the student. Like as I mentioned earlier, the socioeconomic factors, there are more people at poverty level in Warren, certainly, than there are in Bristol. So for a larger percentage of kids in our district, issues like domestic violence and not having proper nutrition and things like that, these are real issues for these kids. And there's certainly, that's a factor, that these are issues that they're going to bring with them to school. There are, this isn't a situation where, again, this is part of it. There's the home factor and how we treat our kids and the protective nature we have for them. And now it's when there's a student and parents and a principal or whoever the authority figure may be, more often than not, it's the parents are, sticking up for their child regardless of whether their child is at fault or if they're participating in bad behavior, whatever the case may be. So there's that aspect of it. I think a large factor was the previous superintendent, a woman by the name of Melinda Thies. She took our district and, from a special education standpoint, went full integration. And while that can be an effective tool for some students, this is a situation where they basically said, all right, we're not going to have dedicated classrooms for special needs students. We're going to introduce them to general population, for lack of a better term. And the challenge with that is they didn't have the resources in place, the tools in place to manage that transition and to support these kids in that environment. Ultimately, it's, there are a lot of kids who are high functioning, but there are kids who are on the severe special needs end of the spectrum, and they are not capable of learning, and it's not a suitable environment for them. They need dedicated attention. They need dedicated teacher's assistants and to help them navigate through this system. And it's not fair to that student to drop them in your typical classroom and expect them just to acclimate. There certainly have been tons of studies to show that integrated classrooms, when you talk about kids who, again, are high functioning, that exposure to peer groups will certainly elevate them as far as their learning performance and capabilities. And there's this hive mentality that the kids all work together, and there's that cohesive learning that takes place. But again, there are just some students where it's unrealistic to expect it. So when this happened, and there are other factors with this as well. So Hugh Cole Elementary, which is the elementary school based in Warren, Hugh Cole actually, for the kids with the most extreme special needs requirements, that became the location where those kids were relocated to. So there's, for example, there's Colt Andrews School Elementary School in Bristol. There's Rockwell School Elementary School in Bristol. The most severe kids were taken and put at Hugh Cole. And the challenge with that is, again, this was a decision that was made, and they didn't resource it properly. They didn't have the proper policies and procedures in place, and it's been an absolute failure. So what has happened at Hugh Cole is, and Hugh Cole, that is a school that we will likely, that is going to be the other shoe that drops. I know there's a lot of attention obviously being paid to KMS right now, and deservedly so. I would say that Hugh Cole is probably a step behind KMS as far as the actions that have been taken and really needing to take a look at the administration's approach to that school. So I think one of the challenges at Hugh Cole, and this came up during a meeting with the superintendent, Dr. Mario Andrade, at a meeting at his office last summer when we were talking about disciplinary issues and academic issues. Ultimately, what has happened is, from a resource standpoint, Hugh Cole kind of gets the short end of the stick. When we talk to the superintendent about class size and resources such as school nurses and librarians and emotional support systems with guidance counselors and things like that, he comes out and says it's equitable across the district. At its surface, it may appear so, but what they're not, a lot of people aren't considering is when you take all of the severe special needs kids and take them and put them in one school, the resources need to follow. So where, yes, it is one teacher for 24 students in the district, when you take the special needs kids and put them all in one school, there needs to be, again, those resources need to follow, and that's what hasn't happened. So what we're seeing is an increase in instances at the elementary level. This obviously is carried up to the middle school. You're going to see less of it at the high school level, but due to maturity issues. But it's created this situation where it's become an unsafe environment for not just the students, but for faculty and staff. And the things came to a head last week, and so now we basically had the sick out. There was unfortunately, as someone who's been involved and affected by bullying myself with my kids, I have 3 in the district, it's nice to finally see some attention being paid to the issue. It's a little frustrating that the things that are being said now are things we said literally 4 and 5 years ago. But sometimes, you need to just stand at on the outside of the carousel, and hopefully the pony ends up in front of you at one point, and you get to go on and take it for a ride. And I think that's what this sick out actually did for us. It gave us the opportunity where, thankfully, the teachers had that action. The media got a hold of it, and a lot of parents who have been idle, and that's understandable. We all live busy lives. We put a lot of trust and faith in our school district to educate our kids. And so some parents aren't as engaged with their child's academic performance and social performance when they're in school, and that's understandable. But something had to happen. So I'm glad that this was a catalyst for things to take place. It's long overdue, and obviously we're going to wait and see what happens from a reaction standpoint. There was an emergency meeting with the school committee where it was closed to public comment, which I know some people were frustrated with as parents who want to have your voice heard. The intent of that meeting was really to address the teachers and hear their concerns. So a dozen teachers basically got up in front of an auditorium full of parents and other teachers and local politicians and what have you, and basically expressed, gave some anecdotal stories, they gave some data. And when you sat there and heard, and even as someone involved, when you hear some of the statistics and things from the really deep dive education side of things, that was really disturbing. Mm-hmm. And so the purpose of that meeting was really to hear these the grievances of a dozen or so teachers, take that into consideration. The school committee then went into executive session where it's a private meeting, and they discussed this issue and tried to come up with their triage level response. We weren't looking for long-term solutions coming out of that meeting. It's all very fresh, and this is something that really takes a lot of time and energy and thought into coming up with, not only coming up with a plan to fix it, but really, agreeing on what the problems are.
Well, let me jump in for a second. Was there any one event that precipitated the sick out, or was it just an accumulation of grievances and frustrations?
It was really an accumulation. And this is, now we're talking about middle school. This is 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. At this school, we have had, now it might be going back a couple of years, we've had unreported sexual assaults.
Whoa, hang on, hold that thought there.
Yeah.
How, and PolitiFact me on this one, but there was a school administrator in the city of Providence
Correct.
who was criminally convicted.
Mandated reporter.
Because she's a mandated reporter.
Correct.
How did that?
This, so it was the end of the school year and forgive me, they all run together, I want to say 2016.
Mm-hmm.
2016, 2017 school year? I believe, yeah, 2016, 2017 school year. There were a few incidents that, for example, there was a student, female student, who was actually volunteering, and I know the student, she comes from a fantastic family. She is, model student citizen. She's a delight, for lack of a better term. So this young woman is staying after to help one of her teachers. And she leaves the classroom, and it just happens to be at the same time that detention is being let out. And 3 boys come out, and they say some inappropriate things, and it spooks her a little bit, so she starts to walk briskly away, and suddenly the boys start to take chase. So they chase her into a classroom, and she did manage to get out, but not after there was some physical contact. We'll leave it at that.
Now, has this been reported to the police?
This was reported to the police.
Mm-hmm.
This was a situation where the 3 boys were charged. It was handled in family court, but because of the way the district handled it, I know that young lady is no longer in the district. She's been pulled out because, unfortunately, the state has an obligation to educate all students.
Right.
And this is where it gets really tricky. So I understand some of the actions of the administration, even though I don't agree with them, and it's because there's been a systemic failure, because oftentimes there are incentives for bad behavior.
Right.
So, for example, our districts are required, every school actually is required twice a year to report their bullying statistics to the Rhode Island Department of Education. And so, for example, the Kickamuit Middle School, for the academic year ending in 17, we reported 0 instances of bullying to RIDE.
How is that possible?
It's not.
I mean, and I'm not diminishing bullying, and there's obviously, different shades of bullying. There's, mental intimidation on up to physical assault, and
Right.
1,000 degrees in between. So is the word disingenuous a polite way of saying?
Well, I mean, it is somewhat, not that I'm into cheating the system or gaming things, but if you're going to do it, at least throw a few in there to make it look like there's something that happened. To say that nothing happened for an entire school year with a school student population of 600 kids, it's not feasible. It's impossible.
Right.
So ultimately, the challenge with this is our district and our administration is held accountable for these numbers. And if your numbers are low, then there's more funding available. If you have a high instance of bullying, then they see you as problem schools, and they pull back on some of those funds.
And let me jump in for a second. I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself. Later on, we're going to talk about how suspensions are measured in the same way.
Yep.
So schools are ultimately self-reporting.
Correct.
School funding is tied into successful behavioral patterns.
Correct.
I guess, what is there, an honors system?
It's the fact that there's little to no checks or balances is disturbing. And this is very well, and so part of this, some of it is just a blatant lack of reporting, where now people, so for example, what we'll find is the state has actually a very strict anti-bullying policy that was adopted by our district. And
which, by the way, it always feels good to put a policy in place.
yeah, and it's
policies always solve problems.
yeah,
because people always listen to policies. Right?
exactly.
Well, guys like you and I listen to policies.
Yeah. We won't go there. I'm a spirit of the law guy. So ultimately what happens is if there is a true instance of bullying, it's very cut and dry as far as what the disciplinary action should be for that student. Now, those waters get muddied a little bit when the student is special needs and has an IEP. Because now they may not be responsive to the traditional discipline or the discipline that goes in line with the bullying policy. So the other aspect of this is if you even though something is bullying, if you characterize it as something other than that, then technically it doesn't qualify. So this is where the playing...
Is there a category on these forms that says boys will be boys? Because that's essentially what we're
doing. Yeah, that's where it goes. Yeah, and it's those. There was a student. Again, this was a sexual assault that took place in the middle school. The victim was a sixth grade male. And
again, let's think about that for a second. Here in Rhode Island, I'll call it a suburban school district, we have sexual assaults taking place in middle school.
Correct.
And there's seemingly, and I guess one of my themes for tonight going to be is sort of the rhetorical question of the night. If it wasn't for the sick out,
I would probably not be sitting here right now.
And people wouldn't be discussing this right now. There wouldn't have been an emergency meeting right now.
Right.
Yet everything we're talking about is public knowledge, public record,
correct,
and available to the administration of the Bristol Warren School District.
Correct. The district knows more than I do. Yeah, I've been fortunate to have some people who trusted me enough to reach out to me so I can point them in the right direction. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah, but this is a good opportunity. Let's step back for a second and touch on your involvement, because people may associate you with recent political activities,
right,
but long before
yeah,
this was even a twinkle in your eye, right? Long before the Healy campaign, long before any of that, you were involved in medical cannabis,
yep,
and you were also involved in education because you, as a concerned parent,
correct,
who spent a lot of time immersing himself in the subject. Fair statement?
Very fair.
So your involvement this is not a flash in the pan, and I'm going to use the word opportunistic because I know that's been thrown your way. This is not opportunism. This is something that stems back a few years now.
Much like my foray into politics, I'm the reluctant participant.
Yeah.
I wish these problems didn't exist so I didn't have to do these things. But people who know me well know that I have a real problem with injustice. I have a real problem with abuse of power. I have a real problem when you involve children. And so my involvement initially started with my daughter, and one of my sons for that matter, in a very short period of time when they were very early in elementary school. The bullying issue touched us.
Right.
And
as it does, by the way, virtually everyone.
Yeah, and just much like you said, there are various shades of bullying. This isn't, I'm talking legitimate bullying.
Right.
This is repeated, someone who's in a position of power, whether it's physical or some sort of rank and file based upon, which is going to happen less obviously at the elementary level, maybe higher, in high school or something like that. But this isn't, and I've seen a lot of comments on social media, this is a bunch of snowflake kids and no one can handle anything and they need to tough it up and parents need to start smacking their kids around and teaching them a lesson.
That always works.
Yeah, and as a parent, I've been very effective as a parent. I constantly get compliments on my kids' behavior. I've never raised a hand to my kids. I don't get physical. It's worked for me. And I have other tools that I use in my parenting bag. So, but this isn't a situation where, it's just a bunch of unruly kids and we're letting the inmates run the asylum. There's a variety of factors. I mean, this isn't just, this is multifaceted. I could probably go down 12 different paths as to why this is happening. And ultimately, some of the responsibility lies with the parents. Some of it lies with the students and being responsible and for their own behavior and how they treat others, for being respectful and emotionally present when they're in school. Some of this lies with the administration. Some of this lies with some of the teachers. I mean, we've had bullying between staff and students. So to go back to the second sexual assault, we had a 6th grader who basically went into the bathroom, an 8th grader followed him in, was sexually assaulted, and when the victim went down to the principal's office, they called the parents, and the parents came in, and the school's response. Now, let me be very clear about this. The people involved in this at the school level are the principal, and there was a dean of discipline. That position has been dissolved in favor of 2 assistant principals. None of those people are at the school anymore. The principal left when all of this stuff started coming to the surface, which is somewhat telling. And the dean of discipline actually retired. So this is, the current principal, a woman by the name of Christine Homan. This was not under her watch. So when the victim went to the principal's office, they called the parents. The parent was told by the district that they wanted to handle this internally and investigate. And this is where the deviation from mandated reporter law comes into play. And knowing that this was not the way that it should be handled, the mom, who I have the pleasure of knowing, she's a great mom, great person, she did the right thing and notified the authorities. So the Warren Police Department shows up, and I have a lot of respect for the Warren Police Department, and they asked the mom what happened and the student, and then they went obviously to the district and said, what happened? And the response there was basically, this isn't bullying, this wasn't a, this is getting blown out of proportion, it's boys being boys. And so the responding officers then go back to the mom and say, with this in their head, okay, the mom's just being over emotional, she's being protective of her child. The school district is looking at this more grounded, through clear eyes. It's, there's the lack of the emotional involvement.
Right.
And so they ultimately tell the mom, we talked to the district and they don't really think this is a big deal. The mom had reached out to me, and I run an advocacy page for students and families in our district, and I went public with that information.
And how long ago was this?
This was 2 years ago.
2 years.
So when that happened, and this is around the same time as the young lady was sexually assaulted in the district, so I made it public that this happened, and we wanted to. The goal really with my concern was, are there other instances of this happening? If we peel back the curtain, what are we going to find? So my goal with making this somewhat public was to bring some attention to it, and again, hope that maybe we'd get the response that we've seen with the teacher sick out. But more importantly, let's see if there are other kids who have been victims of sexual assault in our district where it hasn't been reported, and maybe these kids aren't getting the support that they need to handle that type of situation.
Right.
The response was mixed. There was certainly appreciation from the people involved. And I'd say the majority of people recognized what I was trying to do and understood and appreciated it. There was certainly a number of people who really tried to, I mean, you talk about bullying, really try and paint me as, terms like I was a rando pervert who wanted details about sexual assault, which is why I was getting involved in this. I wasn't a certified counselor or therapist, so I was only going to do harm to these students, when in the reality of it was, our goal was if a family felt they need services, whether that's psychological or they needed to point to someone, as far as the authorities are concerned, if that's at the local municipal level or at the state police level, let's figure out where we need to, the people we need to connect the family and the victim to, so we can get them the resources and we can see some form of justice.
By the way, just as an aside, the people who decided to even suggest that it was appropriate to handle it internally, are those people still employed by the Bristol Warren School District?
That is, I can't definitively say that the superintendent had intimate knowledge of these incidents. Given the gravity, I would assume that he did. He rules with, Dr. Andrade, and I have nothing personal against him. I have some, there's just been too much for too long from a job performance standpoint for him, for me to look the other way or just say, you know what, he's a nice guy and he's trying. I think he certainly puts on a very calculated face when dealing with families.
He's got the game face down.
Yeah, and it's somewhat of a concerned academic, affable, perhaps, and he's got a somewhat of maybe a. He may come across as disinterested, but he's not this hardcore iron fist authority figure, at least externally with families. So I would venture to guess that he was very much aware of what was happening and likely had a hand in the determination not to go report these things as they were required by law.
But there's been no public comment about that whole
No. That was swept under the rug, and this has been the MO of our district for years. Part of the challenge again is we have these great policies, but if you don't, and I'm not a fan of all of these policies, but they're their policies. They better, if this is the path you've chosen, you got to walk the walk. It's your policy, not mine. Enforce your policy. So, again, my entrance into this space was started with my daughter. We had an incident where a student punched her in the stomach, unprovoked. Now, when that occurred, no faculty or staff member saw it happen.
Right.
And so my daughter reported it to her teacher. The teacher brought the student and my daughter out to the hallway and said, did you strike, Abigail? I'll throw her name out there. Everyone knows who she is. Did you strike Abigail? No. Well, what happened? I don't remember. Now, as a parent, and I have 3 kids, if 2 of them getting into something and I ask what happens and one of them says they don't remember, I know who the guilty party is and the other one is dismissed.
Yeah.
That's not how things happened. And my daughter came home saying, Dad, the teacher told the student, she's like, well, suggested that, were you just excited and waving your arms around and accidentally made contact with Abigail? And the student says, yes, that's what happened. And my daughter, even though she was in 2nd grade when this happened, she was well aware the teacher gave the boy an out. She gave him an excuse.
Right.
And he took it. Now, a week later, this same boy, my daughter was in gym class, and she had her water bottle, and the boy came by and hit the bottom of the water bottle. So she came home that day with blood down the front of her shirt, and 2nd grade, and a note from the nurse. No note from the school from a disciplinary standpoint, which, when there's physical contact, that is actually one of the requirements.
When you draw blood, usually.
When you draw blood, yeah. So So that happened. Now, I was of the opinion that this was the second strike. This was physical. And so when I had a conversation with the principal, again, different principal then than what we have now, she basically said that, I said, this is a second strike. If something else happens, I want the boy removed from her class. And they said, well, we don't do that. And if anyone's going to move, it's going to be your daughter.
So,
punish the victim.
Draw blood, hit hard enough so that
Right.
skin was broken somehow.
Yep.
What happened to all this zero tolerance stuff?
That's and that's the problem. And it's just,
show up with, and I'm being extreme here, but show up with a cupcake that looks like a revolver, and you got ATF helicoptering in, and and all hell's breaking loose. You play tag, you're it, and you're considered misogynist, but you actually.
Well, I liken it to very strict gun laws. When you have these, whether it's minimum, sentencing guidelines for possession of a firearm unlawfully and things like that. What we found, and I've talked to a number of lawyers who've echoed this sentiment, judges are, for the most part, they're constitutionalists. That's their job, is really to interpret law and apply it in a courtroom setting, in a judicial setting. So when, the punishment has to suit the crime. And so that's something that really eats at the core of a judge. When you have a gentleman, so say you have somebody there standing in front of you who otherwise is a productive member of society, and they did something stupid. And maybe they're traveling with a lawfully owned firearm, and they happen to have an ounce of marijuana on them. And they get nailed for the marijuana. Now they have a firearm with the drugs. Now you're going to get these very heavy-handed penalties. What you find is the courts generally don't enforce them because they know that the punishment doesn't suit the crime. So zero tolerance sounds nice, and it sounds like it's really strict. But when it comes to application or the punishment phase of things, you have to dial it back. And ultimately it becomes a very black and white thing. I can either, if he bullied, it's a very easy if-then. If you did X, then Y must happen. So I need to make it so X didn't happen. So therefore Y doesn't occur. So that's where we have this shift, and things get classified as something other than bullying, boys being boys, or whatever the case may be.
Those crazy kids.
Yeah. So now what was interesting, while this was happening, my twin boys were in first grade. And I was in the car with the kids after school, and one of my twins was talking about a video that he saw. And as an engaged parent, I said, what video did you watch today? And this wave of shame washed over him, and he hung his head down. He said, I don't want to talk about it. It's inappropriate.
Wow.
So my first grader telling me something's inappropriate. So ultimately, I asked him what it was. He told me he didn't want to talk about it. And that's when his brother chimed in. I know exactly what the video was about. I'm like, did you see it? He said, no, but Jack told me, a few minutes ago. Okay. What was in the video? It was a girl kissing another girl's privates. So as a parent of young children, I always thought that I'd probably have until maybe on the aggressive side 10 years old before I had to have the birds and bees conversation. Never mind the bees and bees conversation. This was something where, I immediately contacted the school. Evidently, one of his classmates had brought in a parent's old cell phone, and there was girl-on-girl porn on the phone. And she was showing it to about 6 or 8 boys. And no one knew anything about it. So I think the boys were really embarrassed. They didn't want to tell a teacher. How do you talk about that? How do you bring it up? And so nothing ever happened. So my son tells me, and I contact the principal and explain what happened. She says I will get on this immediately, and she did. And she called me back probably within an hour and said, I've confirmed that did in fact take place. And we're going to handle this, appropriately. I've already spoken to the parents, and they're coming in, and we're going to make sure this is all taken care of. Great. Now, while this is happening, I'm dealing with my daughter's situation, and the boy who was bullying her had gotten physical with her twice. They had tested at the top of their class in math and reading. And at that level, that's all you do, math and reading. There's no, you're not getting deep into science and social studies and things like that. It's elementary school. So they were actually, because no one else tested at that level, they're actually put together as a pair throughout the entire school day as learning partners. So this young man is turning to my daughter, and who's always been very high performing. You're stupid. You can't do this work. I'm smarter than you. You must have cheated to get to your score because you're an idiot. And so
Lovely.
On a daily basis. So my daughter comes home and says, I don't like math and reading, this is not my daughter. So what's going on? Ultimately, she tells me what's happening, and I called the school. And I said, this is strike 3. I want this student removed. And the principal then told me, this is only the second incident. I said, no, we had the punch in the stomach, we had the hit to the mouth, and now we have this. 3 strikes. I would like him removed from our classroom. And that's when the principal tells me, well, we're only at strike 2 because the first incident wasn't documented as a physical contact. When I asked why, I was told that because it wasn't observed by a faculty or staff member, and I had actually called and notified the school, that it didn't qualify as a strike.
Right.
So, and this is when you get into the characterization of issues and trying to find ways of not reporting things as they happen. So, interestingly enough, I asked the principal at the time if the pornography issue was going to be documented. And she assured me, she said, Mr. Gould, this is very serious. And yes, of course it would be documented. It's in the child's file. And we're handling this with the highest level of response. Which begs the question, and I asked, if my daughter's incident wasn't recorded because I called it in and a teacher didn't see it, that was the same circumstances with the pornography on the phone. So what was different about these 2 incidents that allowed the pornography incidents to be reported and documented, and the incidents with the physical assault of my daughter wasn't? And of course, they didn't have an answer for that. So that was really my first step into at least the bullying and
the alternative reality called the Bristol Warren School District.
Yeah, the discipline side of things. I've since become active on, with testing and the opt-out movement. I was very fortunate to, when these things happen and you share stories with other parents, then you find out that there's some commonality here. So what ultimately happened organically was there was basically a group of parents, myself included, who we were engaged, we were involved, and we wanted to make some positive change. So some people, I was big in the testing issue.
Mm-hmm.
I was obviously big on the bullying and discipline issue. I think and still to this day, because there's so much data out there, and policy and procedure and protocol, is on the IEP and special needs side of things. Mm-hmm. I don't have a special needs child, so it's not something I've gone through myself,
right,
like I have with the other disciplines. So it's something where I rely on the people around me. And I've been very fortunate to have some good parents who, some of them don't even have kids in the district, and they're just good parents who are involved and engaged and understand the law and know the process, and they've been tremendous resources for us as a group, right, so that we can advocate for these students and hopefully point them in the right direction. The IEP issue is huge for a couple of reasons. I think the stat that was mentioned by one of the teachers the other night is 50% of the kids at our middle school have some sort of mental health requirement or special need. Mm-hmm. And it could be something very minor, but 50% of students have some requirement there. And again, we're not staffing as such, we're not resourcing it, we're not addressing those issues, and we're just kind of hoping that these problems solve themselves and we can, introduce policies or programs that'll wish them away, and it hasn't happened.
It won't.
No, it never does.
I mean, if it strikes me that the carrot and stick is completely out of control. Studied ignorance of the issues confronting your school district clearly are the recipe for financial success in terms of funding.
Well, one of the other things you need to think about, Pat, is, so there have been, and I understand the calls, there have been some insane, like really, really bad bullying situations.
Right.
And it's not exclusive to KMS or our. This is something that is nationwide. Do I think KMS has more issues than an average middle school that size and with its socioeconomic profile? Probably a little bit worse than average, and that's due to the lack of response from the district. But I think, as a parent, when your child is a victim of bullying or some sort of assault, you're very quickly want to go to, I want that kid out of the class, out of the school, out of the district.
Right.
The challenge with that is, if it gets to that point and the child is, the determination is made that child cannot exist in that school or that classroom environment,
right,
and they send them out of district, the school district has to pay for that. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about, and we have a very high, Rhode Island, we have a very high cost of educating our students. It's depending on the district, it might range anywhere from $18,000 to $25,000 a year per student. When you talk about, I need to send them to a behavioral-based school that'll meet their needs, that might cost $50,000 a year. So very quickly, if you start enforcing these rules and sending kids out of district, your budget goes with it.
Right.
And
that's always been one of the great sources of debate. My children, we elected not to send my children to public schools, but instead of being a hero to the local school district under the rather twisted serpentine logic of big education these days, mm-hmm, because we are no longer bringing large amounts of funding for children who probably would have been low maintenance, now we're the devil.
Yep, exactly.
We'll take a quick commercial break in a second here, but if you're just joining me, Darrell Gould is an educational activist. You've seen him in other capacities on this show and in the community, but someone who's been involved in it for a number of years in dealing with bullying, dealing with behavioral issues, dealing with funding issues, dealing with prioritization in and around the Bristol-Warren Consolidated School District. I just want to lay out a pattern, but if we talk about our sponsors for a second. But the pattern here seems to be, as we mentioned earlier, we're going to create an honor system for self-reporting, and we're going to effectively put in place incentives to pervert the reporting process. Because it's not a tacit just, okay, we'll happen to come into some money. It's clear, and becoming increasingly clear, that there are educational quote-unquote leaders, as I always say, some hired, some elected, some self-appointed, who will tell you that the bigger picture is the school district gets as much money as it can. And at the same time, there seems to be a compelling lack of basic behavioral standards at seemingly every level in the school. And it's, given the amount of money that's spent there, the hopes, the importance as what it represents for the children going to these schools, I think heartbreaking is probably a better word. Folks, we're going to take a quick break now. If you are listening for the first time, first of all, we're going to take a look at a couple of comments. If you got comments that you want to register and you're watching this on, say, another page, on a GoLocal page, feel free to go to facebook.com/The Coalition Radio if you want to weigh in on any of these subjects. Due to a 7 o'clock postponement, I guess, has probably a more advanced version of what we're circulating through the studio right now. Darrell, I've got another couple of addresses in terms of biohazards that you can go to. We've got some extra time, and we want to dig into. I'm fascinated by this notion that Bristol-Warren School District is not just a school district, but apparently some type of solar system where different bodies rotate, if you will, around the sun that is, in fact, the school district building, and seem to have all sorts of luxuries, proclivities, participation, clout. This is getting, and yet people who live in other communities in Rhode Island are telling me what we're seeing here almost mirrors exactly what's happening in other districts throughout the state.
And people tend to, it's funny because the people go to the comparison to, well, try going to Providence or try going to Central Falls and see how you like it then. If you have to compare our small suburban towns to urban areas,
right,
and everything that goes along with that, if you're comparing apples and Volkswagens,
right,
if you have to go that far, you've lost your argument,
right,
in my opinion.
So we, just a note, we are sponsored, in fact, as we all know, by Yacht Club Soda, Yacht Club Bottling Corporation, based right here in the Centerdale Circle, right here in Little Rhode Island. A big shout out to them tonight. They've got a big announcement coming later in the month. I'm just going to tease it. I'm not going to give it away. Yacht Club Bottling Works, Yacht Club Soda, Rhode Island's boutique soda before, well, who knew we needed boutique sodas? In business for over 100 years, crystal clear water, natural flavors, fructose free, using good old cane sugar. Soda's a treat. It should be treated as such. But at the same time, don't give in to the, as I call it, the refinery sodas, the sodas that are delivered by C-130s flying over Providence seemingly, dropping down whatever swill that they're perpetrating upon the Rhode Island buying public today. Imagine ginger ale with ginger. It's breathtaking to me, the concept that you could have a true cola beverage. At every step of the way. We just came through the Super Bowl. Valentine's Day is coming up. There isn't an event in your family's life where you're not working extra hard. We talk about farm to table. Let's not do your soda refinery to the table. We've got the very best soda on the planet right here. It's made by a Rhode Island family for over 100 years. YachtClubBottlingWorks.com. Of course, go to their facility where they've got it for sale, their company store. That's at the Centerdale Rotary, and available at fine consumers throughout the state. You're a fan of the soda too, aren't you?
Huge fan.
Huge fan. It's good stuff. And again, full disclosure, Darryl is a sponsor as well. We've talked often about Air Science, and it appear to me that these coming weeks are going to be target-rich environments for the folks at Air Sciences. Yeah. We're talking about education, and we're talking about primarily what's happening in Bristol Warren, not because it's a laser-like focus on Bristol Warren. It's just becoming increasingly clear that the problems and challenges that they face, behavioral, structural in terms of its management reporting, which we're going to get a little bit more into in the next session, are endemic throughout the state. We've got a tiny little state here, which has an inordinately huge amount of bureaucracy for its education. We have all sorts of laws being imposed on some people when it's become clear, and clearly it's stunning when you talk about the reporting law,
right.
Because after what happened to that woman in Providence,
the guidance counselor, correct?
Yeah, who I think was woefully underprepared to deal with the law, not because of her ability or her professional inabilities, but because of there you had how cliched is this? A school district leader who wasn't even fully cognizant of the law. This is, by the way, what happens when you just have this knee-jerk reaction that somehow policies are going to replace common sense, rules are going to replace strong management. This is what happens. So I guess my question, I want to just step back for a second. This December, I call it Gina Raimondo's December surprise, school district test results were released for the entire state. How are they doing over there?
We're abysmal. The whole state was awful, obviously.
Right. But I bring that up because, again, the entire reaction of folks, doing the ostrich thing, all right, is that at least we're not so-and-so. And I feel badly because it would appear, now that we're a month 2 plus past the release date of this information, and this is almost unfair to say because I'm not, maybe the media isn't reporting all the efforts, but the only folks that seem to react, as this was a crisis it is, were in fact the folks from Central Falls.
Yeah.
I mean, instant. And quite frankly, this is obviously anecdotal, but my observation after living here for 30 plus years is that parents, often of lesser means, contrary to popular belief, are very much, in many cases, more concerned about their children's day-to-day education because they see it.
They see the value in its ability to lift that kid out of the situation that they're in, and those parents hope for better things for their kid.
Infinitely more self-aware. Now, how many times have you heard Rhode Island parents, well, he doesn't need to go to school. He's going to go on this athletic trip, and, what he'll learn there will be much more important than anything he learns at school. Yeah, okay, that's a real compliment to your school system. So you've got these abysmal test results.
Yep. We had, I knew the numbers a month or two ago when they came out. They were tip of my tongue, but at the end of the day, we came in somewhere like, and I know I'm going to mix these up. It was something like 34% proficient in reading and language arts, and 26% proficient in math. So and I could go obviously into the whole testing thing and how arbitrary that is, how tests are not I'll harp on the test scores because every time I talk about academic performance with the district, they talk about test scores. So if that's the hill they want to die on, then so be it. I'm very familiar with the tests that we have, their failings, what they don't do, the problems that go with them, the standards that they're based upon, all the flaws of them. So I don't put a high amount of value in those tests as a tool of measuring not only student performance, but certainly not teacher performance.
Right. But ultimately, there at some point must be a measurement.
Yeah.
And as imperfect as this may be, it certainly provides given the shared testing now, it certainly provides a real portrait of where we are relative to Massachusetts.
Yeah. Massachusetts is regarded as one of the top states in education. So.
And for the moment, I mean, there seems to be, again, well, we've got Central Falls and we've got Pawtucket. Well, anyone that's spent any time in Massachusetts know that, listen, there's some wonderful communities up there.
Go to Roxbury.
Go to Lawrence. Go to
Lowell.
Chicopee.
Go to Holyoke. Go
to fill in the blanks. You go to Pittsfield. I mean, wonderful people in these communities, but certainly suffering economically in many of the same ways that our communities here are. So spare me the nonsense that, as has been pointed out too often, the term, well, Rhode Island's unique. No, Rhode Island's small. It's not unique. It's a reflection, yes, do we have some cultural...
Yeah, we got coffee syrup, all right? We got coffee syrup and wieners. Let's get past that and just start. We're so special compared to everybody else.
Everything else. And we got Yacht Club soda.
Yep.
All right, that's a good thing. Other than that, and we talk funny, but other than that, we're just like the rest of the country, aren't we? And the rest of the country is doing a whole hell of a lot better, aren't they?
Yeah. And
who is that a reflection on? Now, obviously, it's a patchwork quilt, as they like to say in progressive politics. Let's talk about the structure of the school district in general.
Okay.
So, because clearly there are management issues.
Yes.
If you've got an attempt by credentialed school educational professionals to self-investigate essentially crimes, there is I would imagine the term is a cultural issue. A cultural issue exists in terms of the management structure at Bristol Warren School District. Now, it isn't just a school district, though, is it? There's lots of little organizations floating around the periphery of this.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors in play.
What is this organization, Bristol Warren? There's some sort of educational foundation?
BWEF, Bristol Warren Education Foundation.
And what's the history of that? I mean,
So BWEF is actually, and I believe the statistic is 25% of our school districts in the country, they're augmented from a budgetary standpoint by nonprofits and third parties.
Okay.
And so that's where BWEF falls. BWF was started as a means of, again, augmenting the existing programs in the district. They do a lot of fundraising. They introduce a lot of programs, and
so in its purest sense, it's any community that can generate that type of efforts. It should be a positive.
Oh yeah, and for the most part it is. I think there have been, and this is where we might start getting into the political side of things. So as someone who has been very vocal on issues,
yeah, that's fair.
Someone who at times can garner some attention from a media standpoint, people will share information with me about certain things, and with the hopes that I can either give them some advice or help them fix the problem, or sometimes just a vent, to be honest. So it had been expressed to me that, the two concerns. Now, let me just, I know this is an issue. When I did a live stream on my Facebook page just the other day, and there was certainly a response from people associated with Bristol Warren Education Foundation regarding some of what I said. I am just communicating things that have been told to me, some of this by people who are inside that group. I have no reason not to believe these things. There's been some decent data provided to me, and some suggestions as to where to look to get more information. Now, being a political candidate in the last campaign season, small business owner, a single father of 3 young kids, going through a move and everything else that I'm dealing with, I just don't have the bandwidth to do everything, and going deep dive into a nonprofit is not something that's a high priority for me. That said, it was communicated to me that BWEF may have involved itself politically in an effort to get a particular individual reelected to the school committee.
Which is a huge
no when you talk about nonprofits.
No go, not to do.
So that honestly is the more concerning for me. The other information that was communicated was, BWEF does provide grants to local groups that do children-based activities, usually academic or maybe extracurricular. And so there is a theater group in town, a children's theater group, that BWEF had provided a grant to. And they had their casting call for one of their recent productions, and I was told about 200 kids tried out. None of those children were mine. I have nothing. My children are not into theater. It is not, this isn't just so everybody knows, because it gets brought up like, oh, your kid tried out and they didn't get a part, so Daryl's upset about it. We're not a theater family. Not that I have anything against it. It's just not what my kids do. And I have no personal interaction, even from that I'm aware of, 2 or 3 degrees of separation. This is just strictly people upset with things and communicating it to me. So what I was told was, what was brought to my attention was people thought it was rather suspicious that BWF would provide a grant to this group to help them, to fund them. And when they had their recent casting call for one of their productions, 200 kids tried out, and the majority of the children who got the parts had some connection to families of board members at BWEF. So again, not something that stuff happens. It's not governmental. It's private organization stuff. So,
but some of these grants, and correct me if I'm out of school here, lack of a better term, you do have the long arm of the Rhode Island State Legislature providing some of the grants.
Grants as well.
And so you've got a very small group of people. I mean, by the way, this is starting to sound like a really bad B movie.
Oh, it's awful. It's when I talk, if I have the opportunity, and I know I can be long-winded, when I have the opportunity to concisely break it down and give people all right, let's focus on education and bang, 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 and let's focus on discipline, and I go through it. At the end, most people would say, it just doesn't seem plausible. If I saw it in a movie theater or on a TV screen, it might be entertaining,
Right.
but just not realistic. That all these things are happening in, again, a suburban school district with a couple of small towns, and what seemingly is, and they're great towns. I mean, both towns have been recognized by various magazines or tourist groups as
they're really cool places to live.
As hidden gems on the Warren side.
Listen, the town I live in has no soul, and it's a wonderful place, nice people. There's no center of town. There's no seaside. There's no
a lot of history.
I mean, they're just Warren's Bristol's beautiful. Warren's great. Maybe it's just because it appeals to my wannabe ex-hippie hipster kind of job.
Foodie artist enclave. We have some fantastic live music venues. We have some people who, from a business standpoint, and the amazing thing is, and I'll say this about a lot of the restaurateurs in our town, and this goes for the Galactic Theater, the Square Peg, Trafford, and I'm going to leave off a ton of places, Bywater, and all these restaurants. The crazy thing about these people, you'd think being a restaurant owner in such a small town, it'd be hyper competitive. These are people who, they just want to see the downtown area be revitalized.
Right.
So they work together. When we may have events like the Warren Walkabout, when the restaurants and live music venues and bars and whatnot will actually coordinate and say, hey, listen, we're all going to be at the Square Peg to start out our day, but then they're closing early, and everybody's going to come over to Restaurant B, or some of us might go to here for live music. So it's really cool to see a bunch of people who genuinely care about the town.
Yeah.
And its economic viability, and they're doing the heavy lifting in an effort to bring it back. And it's very admirable. I like to, Warren, Bristol is that quaint, historic,
Christmas card quality.
you have the 4th of July parade. Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful, like I said, I grew up there. It's a beautiful town. Warren, we're just we have a little bit more dirt under our fingernails.
Right.
And I mean that in the most positive way possible.
Yeah, no, it's so what's heartbreaking then is to see a handful of people, and I'm going to characterize it just as complete outsider, a school department head who's acting as if he's accountable to no one. My only experience with the school department heads, I've been waiting for about 2 years now for a return phone call. I'm not sensing I'm getting one any.
Get in line, because the media, that was their big gripe this week, was from everyone from talk radio to traditional media. He wasn't making any statements. There was no response. All this stuff was happening.
If you look at other issues going around the country right now, in Virginia, things like that, the new trend post-Clinton is to just ride it out.
Yeah.
Make them come and get you. Literally, and if the offense, real or imagined, isn't indictable, no one's going to come and get you, and after a while people will forget. Except, in this case, it's not, adults, it's children.
Well, and the problem with it is it's so incestuous. So we have, these nonprofit groups that deal with education, and they're purportedly trying to get people elected. And those people are sympathetic to the superintendent. And then there's, you can go in so many different directions with this. There's,
right.
Then there's so one of the things that was brought to my attention was, obviously, with all of these severe bullying incidences, there was actually something that came to light. It was the last day of school in the 2017 school year. There was a student that was attacked by another student and left the school in an ambulance. the student who was the attacker faced no disciplinary action for that incident because it happened on the last day of school, and disciplinary action does not carry over to the next school year. So it's like the purge on the last day of school because you can do whatever you want. And trust me, kids are smart and they're resourceful. If they figure out that that's the case, and if you have someone you have your eyes on, you have some kind of personal vendetta, and you plan on getting physical, you just wait till the last day of school.
The purge. Again, this is... Now, Chickamuet encompasses what populations?
As far as...
Both towns?
Both towns, correct. That is the only middle school for both towns. It serves both towns.
Right. So, literally, as you walk down the cobblestone streets of Bristol and look at the, what is it, or drive by Colt State Park. And
Colt Andrews School, for that matter.
Embrace the point, go down to the point and have a cocktail and a toast to the end of the evening. Or you have lunch at one of Warren's funkier but charming bistros. Understand that the kids, in certain cases, are beating the crap out of each other at the local school. And
it's Fight Club. Rule number one is you don't talk about Fight Club. It's plain and simple. You know, it's sad, and it's, I mean, and we kind of, I think at this point, Pat, you have to have a lighthearted approach at times, bring levity to it, because it's so sickening. And if you, I mean, like I said, it's very incestuous. So, as you mentioned, legislative grants. My former opponent and sitting state representative, Jason Knight, is now Jason. We were, as you know, I'm not a proponent of the legislative grant program.
No, it's an abomination.
It's
a
currying favor, buying votes. It's the worst in politics.
Right.
And
no accountability.
No accountability whatsoever.
I mean, it's an extra as an outside of the budgetary process. It is literally an abomination.
So, I was very critical of that program during the 2016 race, and perhaps as a result, when Jason Knight won, in order to be more fair and equitable, he put together a legislative grant team that basically people, you know, they would field the request from the community as far as, okay, if the Warren Rec Department needs a grant for something, then let's put that in the pool. And this group of people who are all politically aligned with Jason Knight. This wasn't something where he said, you know, let's get some balance and let's get a conservative and an independent. It's basically him and three progressives, and he's progressively leaning.
Kind of
when he sticks to it.
Yeah.
So
90. How many times? What was the percentage he votes with the speaker?
98.6. So yeah. So the Reform Caucus, apparently they're happy with, you know, as long as you're not dealing with, as long as you don't agree with Mattiello 100%, and you keep it down below 99, everything's okay.
It's all good.
So Jason put this team together to review and figure out who they would actually submit these grants for. That theater group actually happens to be one of those recipients of the legislative grant. So that's my tax dollars. So that's where I can actually start being bothered by it.
Right.
You know, but one of the, so like I was saying, with such a large recurrence of severe bullying instances in our district, in our schools, it was just a matter of time. It's 2019. We're a litigious society. People are going to start filing lawsuits, and that has happened. With some of the recent cases of bullying, there were parents who were asking out publicly and saying, is there, you know, I'll go find an attorney, but if there's somebody who's already doing this or somebody that we can all use and perhaps get some kind of discounted rate as a result of that, who can that be? Is there somebody that is already involved? And ultimately, Jason Knight's name came up. Jason Knight is a practicing attorney. Now Rhode Island doesn't have specialization in law,
right.
So you can't say you're an expert in drunk driving law or divorce or
except for that guy who literally advertises he wrote the law.
He wrote the law on, yeah. So that's kind of the mentality of this. This is so what. So Jason has evidently been the legal representation for families who's suing the school district. I have a real problem, and this is and some of this, and this isn't sour grapes, but I ran on the fact that I'm an advocate for other people, and I think that's what our district needed politically.
Right.
We don't need another typical politician. We don't need.
He's
what
not
we
getting
got.
paid, is he?
Oh, he's getting paid. These are paid services.
So, all right. So I'm
This is not pro bono.
Splain, Lucy, splain here. All right. So
I'd like to, well, I know, well, in part because I'm not an attorney, if I was sitting in that seat and someone came to me and said, we have bullying issues, my child's experienced this, I may refer them to an attorney if I think it will help them.
right.
But as their state rep, someone who represents them, I'm going to advocate for them with the school district, with Rhode Island Department of Education, and possibly at the state legislature. If there's something we can do from a legislative standpoint, whether it's, I tend to be more on the repeal side, but adding or repealing to make this a more tenable situation, I'm all about it. And I think that's what that role should be.
So I'm still getting over this. So wait a minute. Jason Knight is profiting personally from litigation aimed directly at the Bristol Warren School District.
Correct. Part of why this doesn't sit well with me is because Jason Knight is not a litigation attorney. He's not a litigation specialist.
I thought he represented crooks and drunk drivers.
He's a criminal defense attorney.
Okay.
So I could understand. I still think there's a tremendous conflict of interest, but I think it's amplified by the fact that this isn't even his area of expertise or what he practices on a daily basis.
No, but I mean, I'm sorry to keep interrupting because this is,
Yeah.
despite the cold medicine, despite the addled brain here, isn't this one of the things that progressives have weighed so heavily against people like Mattiello, a certain former representative who was the head of the finance committee, and on and on and on. The fact that essentially you've got a culture in Rhode Island where attorneys become elected officials to build their law careers.
And much we talked about, there were attorneys who advertised that use me as your drunk driving attorney because I wrote the book on drunk driving law, and they mean it literally because they wrote and sponsored the legislation. And as such, when they write this legislation, they are intimately familiar with any loopholes or backdoors that would then allow them to be more attractive to clientele because they know how to get people off on the charges. So it's go with me because I'm an insider and I wrote the book on it and I'm going to get you off. And they're using their political positions as a way to enrich themselves personally through their law practice.
Right.
It's the stuff we complain about on a daily basis. And it's unfortunately, because it's Rhode Island, it's every politician is a crook, this happens, this is just, you're never going to change it. So we've come to the point that we just accept this as, this is what politics is. And it's not. It's a total...
And there are some, even though we may disagree with their philosophies violently, in a rhetorical sense, of course, there are some very, very good people out there, who you've got a father-son combination that has fought. Now the father passed from cancer, who has fought diligently for 2 generations now to ensure that patients have the right and the access to medical cannabis in a somewhat cost-effective now, dignified way.
Well, and Scott Slater came from a law enforcement background, which generally they've never been huge proponents of marijuana in any capacity.
Of any sort of liberty.
Yeah.
Any sort of personal freedom.
True.
Sorry, that's another. Yeah, so I mean, and we take a moment to salute people like that who, again, we may disagree with philosophically, but there are people up there who are doing it for the right reason. As I always like to say in the coalition, people who are trying to help lives, not get one. All right, so we have to keep stepping back in the wider picture. So, what was that old Carol Burnett shtick she did in the Carol Burnett show? You have to be of a certain age. She did a parody of soap operas called As the Stomach Turns.
Okay.
Okay, that's what we got going on here. So, we've got a school department head who is accountable to no one, answers to no one, won't even, I mean, I got to tell you, if Tim from Channel 12 was calling, I'm answering the phone. And if Hummel shows up, oof.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hummel, what can I help you with, Mr. Hummel? this guy just doesn't feel the need to be accountable to anyone.
Well, and I think it's interesting. So when this first happened, I run this advocacy page, and we have a decent following in the district. And so I actually put up a poll question right when the sick out happened, and I knew my thoughts on it, and let's get a general consensus of people who aren't necessarily on this deep dive mission, but are kind of surface level, know what's going on.
Which is most people.
Unfortunately.
Most people, yeah.
And again, I don't judge people. Everybody has their own stuff to deal with and their own priorities. But so we put a poll out there saying, do you feel that in light of what's happened, do you feel that Mario Andrade is capable of leading this district as its superintendent? Before I came on to the program tonight, Pat, I checked. We're about it's a week-long poll on Facebook, obviously non-scientific. But we have, I think when I came in, we were just over 400 responses. 92% feel that Dr. Andrade is not capable of leading our district.
And the other 6 people are either family or on the town council, school board,
or there might be a degree of separation between them and Dr. Andrade, or or perhaps they had, if your child's never experienced discipline issues or IEP issues or things like that, then if you had something and he helped you, and there are people that he's helped.
I don't think anyone. I don't get the sense that at this point, most people, there are a few people out there who are pretty tweaked, but most people aren't looking to vilify anyone individually. But at a certain point in time, how much more can you take? Again, no accountability from the highest levels.
No transparency.
No transparency. Blatant attempts to coerce people to not report criminal, issues in direct conflict with state law. You've got a culture of failure as far as the overall school itself. Has he been able? Now, I was about to ask him, has he been able to maintain any level of teacher? How he's managed those attitudes? Well, they just had a huge sick out. I don't know. I mean, is there such a thing as a vote of no confidence? Well, is that next?
So basically what the teachers were going to, at KMS, were planning on a vote of no confidence over the summer. And they were approached by a candidate from the school committee who said, hold off, I can fix this. You just need to give me a chance. Mm-hmm. Vote for me. Tell people to vote for me. Get me back in there. And ultimately, she won her race. I was a supporter of her opponent, a gentleman by the name of Chuck Thibodeau, who's a Warren Townie. He's
done yeoman's work.
I think he's the guy that we needed ultimately.
Right.
And it was kind of interesting because there were some interesting things that happened with that race, because there was a level of you would have thought it was the President of the United States. For example, the Warren Town, our school committee is nonpartisan. The Warren Town Democrats, they would post ads, supporting, their boy Lofton Asensio or Lofton Longo or whatever.
Yeah, well, Lofton Longo, yeah.
Lofton Longo, the golden boy who has been a ghost ever since he got found to be a total fraud. So that the Warren Town Democrats would do group ads, and it was the first time that they had ever included a school committee candidate,
right?
Because again, it's nonpartisan race,
right,
in any of their advertising, any of their support, and it was because there's this big progressive movement in the East Bay, and these are all people who are like-minded and supportive of one another, and that's the one thing I'll give it to the progressives is they coordinate.
They show up.
They show up.
And they write checks. I mean, how else do you account for, as one person pointed out, near and dear to us, that you have a individual who didn't even make the 6-person cut for town?
7. Yeah.
7-person cut for town council, with less than $400 in her campaign account, in less than a handful of weeks, have $25,000 plus as if she was now the chosen one.
Yeah, she raised almost $40,000. She spent over $10,000 on her primary campaign. Now, this isn't a special election. So this is such an abbreviated election cycle for this race, for this seat, that I mean, when I ran, I always tried to do it as economically as possible. The idea of people giving me their hard-earned money for something political is somewhat unsettling, but I do appreciate it, and I would certainly work as hard as I could, and I understand that money's required to buy yard signs and get your name out there. Or
sponsor how many Google ads in the last?
Oh dear God, I can't go in the East Bay.
I'm not going to say where, but some of the places that these Google ads showed up are pretty intriguing.
Yeah, you can. If you want to type in some questionable keywords, then the candidate's face comes up all the time. It's
not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, hey, that's what you want to associate with.
I mean, holy cow. Oh my! So you've just got a mess here.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm glad there's some attention to it. For us now, it's we know what the history is. We know all the incidents, and now we're making that more public. So when people come and challenge us and say you shouldn't be pointing the finger at this person or that person or the administration or this collectively, here's the reasons why. This isn't something where we're just knee-jerk reaction. We didn't just get upset about a day out of school and run and grab pitchforks and torches. Again, going back to the whole incestuous nature of this, there was our local newspapers, East Bay newspapers. There was an op-ed written by a gentleman by the name of Jock Hayes. Jock Hayes is his family owns the East Bay newspaper group.
Okay.
He was also the former chair of the Bristol Warren Education Foundation. And his op-ed came out, and it was scathing and actually downplaying all. Now, this is a group that is sympathetic to the superintendent, and there are a lot of ties there. So they've come to his defense and basically came out and said, this is all a bunch of BS, and the school, and basically the teachers just wanted a day off, which is why they pulled the sick out crap.
Forget about the political ties for just a second. Most of the teachers I know are committed professionals, and that's just insulting.
It's if you heard for anyone interested, certainly in the East Bay, there are a lot of people who are in attendance, and they live stream. So you can go on Facebook and find that stream all over the place. Mm-hmm. As far as the teacher's testimony at that meeting the other night, a couple of teachers were shedding tears as they communicated this stuff. They're passionate about this stuff. They want to teach. They've been handcuffed by Common Core, by standardized testing. Now they're in these, lawless environments where I had one mother reach out to me and say her son has significant special needs from an education and learning standpoint. Mm-hmm. And it also manifests itself behaviorally. So her son was literally sent out of the class almost every day for a period of months, and she was never made aware by the school. The teacher's frustrated because this kid's a boomerang. She sends him down to the office, and ultimately he comes right back. Right. And she sees nothing being done from a corrective standpoint. Right. And ultimately, the mom found out. She says, Darryl, she's like, I was told that my son has, on almost a daily basis, has been sent down to the office for behavioral issues. One might think that because, and this was her assertion, she's like, I didn't know that my son was eligible for an IEP and special services. So she is under the belief that the school knew, or the administration, not necessarily the teacher, because the teacher's hands were tied. The school kept it a secret because if they let her know that her son was sent down to the principal's office every day, you got to find out why is this happening. Mm-hmm. Then it's going to lead to the IEP conversation. IEPs cost this district money. So
Big
they don't
money.
want to. And I'll tell you right now, there's a woman, and I don't speak poorly about people directly. This is strictly based upon job performance. There's a woman named Leslie Anderson. I can't think of someone who more so should not be dealing with not just children, but special needs children. She's responsible for the special education of our entire district. Mm-hmm. And the stories I've heard from parents and from people inside the district, from a staffing standpoint, about her behavior and how she plays games with stripping families and students of IEPs for financial reasons, it's reprehensible. It's disgusting. In as much as I think Mario Andrade needs to go and we need some new leadership, I almost think equally important is Leslie Anderson needs to go. And I think one of the challenges with this is, I know that certainly Dr. Andrade is bonused on budgetary numbers. I believe, I don't know for a fact, but it's my understanding that Leslie Anderson is also bonused and rewarded financially for coming in under budgetary numbers. So if these people strip kids of IEPs and don't put resources in place that they need, and they save a whole lot of money, they get bonuses that I believe Mario's last bonus was somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 or $30,000.
That's absurd. I mean, the question on how to reward teachers is possibly the most challenging one in education.
Because you can't do it based upon test scores, because it's not a measurement of the teacher's ability to be a good teacher. Some kids just learn different ways. They have impediments.
There's too many intangibles.
Yeah.
There's just too many intangibles. I mean, and it can vary from year to year.
Yeah.
You can get a particularly challenging class, and a year later, you can get these, well-behaved little kids who look like little cherubs and look at you with big wide eyes every day and say, "Can I get some extra homework?" It can literally swing that dramatically. Yeah. I'm married to a teacher.
Yep.
All right. And most of these kids are great kids, but you're right. They all learn differently.
Yeah.
They just all do. So I don't know if anyone has an answer for that yet, but certainly spiking the ball, if you will, burying. If there's any, possibly the most disturbing trend out of everything that's come out in the last week has been that the Bristol Warren School District overtly acts to suppress information that would somehow cast their performance as inadequate.
Right.
Which, to me, if it isn't, should be criminal.
The fox has been guarding the hen house for a very long time.
And again, the school systems in this state have been able to get away with, for a lifetime, this test we have is wrong, this test we have is inadequate, this one, and all of a sudden, rut-row, we're using what Massachusetts uses, and it shows us just how poor.
Yep.
It's what is it? The soft bigotry of diminished expectations. We are taking children and we are essentially imprisoning them intellectually for a lifetime because of our inability to give them the proper education at this point in their life.
Right.
It's a lifetime's worth of consequences, and no matter what Gina does at CCRI, no matter what anybody does anytime, you get past a certain grade level, and it's just too damn late.
Yep.
And the fault lies right in the hands of the people who are in charge.
It's sad that there's almost like a whole generation of students in our district that, I mean, there's a lot of heavy lifting that's going to have to take place in order to fix this.
But what's troubling is, particularly troubling, and I often point to the now clamor for universal pre-K, the very people who have been such abject failures in terms of performance are being asked to be the ones to lead us out of the desert. How is that possible that we're going to give the same cast of characters another 10 years at the state level to kind of figure it out?
I'm surprised. I was hopeful when Commissioner Wagner came in.
Right.
But I've been around long enough to know that you just got to wait and you got to look at the performance. You can't look at, the speeches they make and the pitch.
There were a lot of people, my good friend John Laughlin, I haven't reminded him this in about a year or two, I will this Saturday, admonished me the week after Gina Raimondo was inaugurate it, and that we need to give her time, because based on her performance as treasurer, she looks like she could be a really great governor. I'm never letting him forget that one. I just can't. Great guy, great show,
Yeah.
Saturday mornings. You should definitely watch it on WPRO AM 630. I think he's on from like 11 to 2 or thereabouts. Forgive me, John. But I'm never, ever going to let him down with that. And so the old tired line about a fish rotting from the head. The entire culture of this school district seems to be broken.
I think the community and the will of the teachers are the duct tape holding it together right now.
Right.
And I think I'm very pleased to see that for the most part, the parents recognize the situation the teachers are in.
I give the teachers all the credit in the world. Just the type of bravery it takes to just buck the system like that. That took stones.
Well, especially in our district, because there's things can get punitive.
Absolutely, it's a place of employment.
It's tough.
And it has brought down, holy hell, it has brought down the entire region's spotlight, if you will, on them at a time when there's so many things to be frustrated about. But universally, I mean, and just on conversations you and I have had, it seems like they have wonderful teachers there.
Yeah. We have some great. I could rattle some off, but they're great people, and they're people in the community. You know, we have a lot of teachers actually live in Bristol and Warren who
Right.
teach in the district. They're people that I went to school with as a kid, and they're good people, and they're dedicated, and they're passionate, and it's. I think the big fear, and I think fortunately the action they took is going to stem any mass exodus from teachers.
Right.
My hope, anyway. Let's keep them in. Let's fix it. And that's really where we're at now. What do we do now?
Yeah, and we've got a few minutes left. Moving forward?
So basically, what came out of the meeting the other day was the school committee said we're putting a school resource officer on site. I think that's strictly for appearances.
Well, that's the move that says, okay, we get it, and there's a problem. We realize we have to do something.
Yeah, they have to do something. And no long-term solutions were going to come out of the meeting the other night.
Right.
You know, they went to executive session for a couple of hours. They talked about things. They came out. They basically formed a second committee that's going to look at how do we fix all this stuff. What are the ideas? What are the solutions? The ideas have been there. I've heard a number of them. You know, as far as different ways of schools of thought and methodology on discipline, on education, all of it. So just now it's a matter of, and we've heard them be proposed multiple times, we need things to get implemented, and we need someone who's consistent, dedicated, and willing to see it all the way to the end game, because ultimately what happens is these things either don't get implemented, or it's the flavor of the month. It gets implemented, and then it gets bailed on in favor of something else, mm-hmm. which gets bailed on in favor of something else, right. And you just keep kicking the can down the road. So, so moving forward, the goal ultimately is there's another, in as much as I operate the Bristol Warren Regional School District Student and Family Advocacy page, there's another group called Parents Advocating for Change, mm-hmm. or PAC or PAC, started by two great moms who are very much involved. They've been exposed to the bullying and discipline issues through their kids, and they've totally immersed themselves in the issues, and so they've started another group that is a little bit less political than what I do, mm-hmm. Which I think there's a definite need for. So
right.
We're working in conjunction with one another. We might have slightly different flavors and approaches, but mm-hmm. We're all trying to work in the same direction. So our goal is keep communicating with the parents and families, making sure they're in the know, hoping that people continue to show up at school committee meetings, and hold people accountable and drive the change that we need to fix this mess.
Great stuff. Yikes.
Yeah.
for anyone out there who thinks it's not happening at some level in their school system, watch, listen, learn.
Talk to the teachers. They know.
Well, and you know what? If anything comes from this, perhaps the notion that there should be more direct contact with teachers and the community. There are far too many instances in government in Rhode Island where you have gatekeepers whose vested interest is in suppressing access. Mm-hmm. That's just true in schools. We found that out in Health and Human Services last night when we found out that, shockingly, Gina screwed the pooch on yet another contract. Mm-hmm. So you have, as Tara Granahan pointed out so convincingly this morning, you have literally very ill, very sick people sitting outside in the cold waiting for rides that probably aren't going to come. But when they do, or even if they don't do, we'll get charged egregious amounts of money for that. Yep. I got an idea. How about a little less government and a little more common sense?
There have been calls in our district for deregionalization. I think that would punish both districts. I think it would actually benefit Warren more because from an infrastructure standpoint, we have two of the larger schools in our district physically. So we could house all of our students in those two schools, right. Where Bristol would have to recommission some old buildings that they decommissioned as small schools, right. When we regionalized. So, if I would love, in my dreams, my utopia. So
I'll get you in trouble.
Yeah, or at least lose you an election.
Yeah.
In my utopia, Warren would be able to be a test bed where we would have true school choice. So have no public schools servicing Warren, and whether those kids go to public schools out of district or charter or private schools or something along those lines, yeah. Then let's use it as a test bed. We're the smallest town in the state. It's very easy to bring change like that. Mm-hmm. My hope is that it would happen, but that's right now. I'm just focused on let's fix.
If you're walking home from school, what is it? About 4 miles, right?
It depends on whose house you're going to.
On that note,
that's one more cease and desist letter I'm going to get from this.
Absolutely, and I helped.
Excellent.
Well, listen, all the credit in the world for being as involved as you are.
It's a curse. I don't know. There are a lot of times I wake up, or I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning, just staring at my ceiling, and I don't even remember how I got here. I wasn't politically active when I was younger, and ultimately, like, if I really think, I know it stemmed from my daughter got bullied, and I got into education, and then, like I said, that started branching off into testing and curriculum and Common Core, and then IEPs, and it's just grown and grown, and then obviously you start looking at politics in general, and that's what was the catalyst for me getting involved politically. Then Bob Healy was who I'm a total fanboy. Bob had a tremendous impact on me. I hold him in the highest regard, and Bob cut his teeth on education. I unintentionally followed a similar path. Obviously, I worked in the Healy campaign with a great group of people, and that ended up being a springboard for my participation in the Libertarian Party and being a candidate in 2 election cycles. So here we are.
Well, keep us posted.
Will do. Thanks for having me.
Because again, as Warren goes with this, Warren Bristol goes with this, every single town in the state, I'm convinced. I do believe that there are probably school districts out there that are much better run. Yeah. Where you don't have this culture of crisis, you don't have gatekeepers, you don't have interpersonal relations that have gone mad, between the highest levels and, the conflicts that can create. And,
Well, sunlight's the best disinfectant, so fortunately things are being brought out to light, so let's hope it all gets cleaned up.
Darryl Gould, educational activist, man about town. Your Facebook page awaits you. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. In the 8 o'clock hour, as always, we're going to be Libertarian Fabulous. We'll be bringing in a guest who's the with the Erie County, New York affiliate of the Libertarian Party, who has taken on the state of New York and the state of New York court system to essentially sue for your right to self-defense. This is going to be interesting. And of course, we'll be talking about with folks from the Rough Phillips campaign. But, as always, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and CoalitionRadio.us. Folks, it's a wonderful night to be out and about here in the Naked City, Providence, Rhode Island. You know, we've been given a little bit of a hiatus, I guess, from the extreme cold. It's not quite spring-like, but it's a great night to come downtown, have a bite to eat, avail yourself of any one of a number of entertainment options that amaze me even to this day that exist in Rhode Island. There is no better place to sin in America than Providence, Rhode Island. Folks, stay tuned. We're going to take about a 4 or 5 minute break. We'll be right back. And we are back. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. The naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. We've told, well, a really long one tonight. I want to thank Daryl Gould for coming in studio with his entire family, talking about the education chaos that's happening in the Bristol Warren School District. But we're running a few minutes late because of some technical issues, but I want to get right down to it. In the 8 o'clock hour every week, we focus on a different person who we consider libertarian fabulous. And in doing so, also spotlight the ongoing contributions of the Ruff Phillips 2020 campaign. My statement, by the way, and my opinions are independent of the campaign. I support them entirely in their efforts, and I'm looking forward to doing whatever I can do to make Kim Ruff the next president of the United States. But at the same token, editorially and philosophically, I do not speak for the campaign. That's a preface, of course, to a very brief discussion of what happened this week with a certain former governor of the state of Massachusetts. Anyone who's listened to this show for any period of time or knows anything about the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island will understand that one of our finest moments, a moment of unity, a moment of spirit, came in the 2016 election when we told Bill Weld to go home. I wish the rest of the party had done the same thing, told him simply to go home. I have no doubt that he's a fine gentleman. I have no doubt that he's an articulate individual. He's a scholar. I'm not here to cast aspersions on anything of his personal nature. I will say this. 3 times we have been denied, and it's time to end it on 2 levels. We need to understand that Bill Weld represented an ongoing, just constant flood of liberty right Republicans who we nominated to some of the highest candidacies in our party in an attempt to gain popularity where there was none to be had. We must understand at this point in our party's history that our growth, our future, and our integrity will all depend on building parties from the ground floor up, from the township level, the county level, the state level, the affiliate level, as we call it in the libertarian movement. That's how it has to happen. The notion that somehow we can throw some flutie-like pass and have an immaculate reception and get one of these people to convert to us when all they are doing is basically misappropriating our party to use it as a vehicle for their own personal political benefit, we need to understand that and we need to stop it now. He's gone. I'm grateful that he left now as opposed to in the middle of the campaign because I'm convinced that he would have torn this party asunder come next summer. He would have ripped this party to shreds when it has become clear to everyone that his intent was personal self-aggrandizement. I want to make something else very clear, and a couple of people on the web did a much better job than I ever could. Bill Weld is not a victim. The notion that somehow he exemplifies the poor treatment given to people in this party is ludicrous. I have met people at both conventions, people I've never met in my life, who I count as some of the nicest, smartest, just people of integrity that I've met in my entire 57 years. I find that people in person in this party tend to be wonderful, and the notion that we would conflate the practices of a few outliers who exist to troll on social media as representative of the party's behavior in general to be simply ludicrous. I also want to make one point very clear, and again, someone else did a much better job than I've done with this. The notion that where we are as a party today has anything to do with any of the efforts of Bill Weld is ludicrous. This party has got a 40, 50-year history of activism by people who started decades ago and crafted a philosophy, a statement of principles, and a belief system that carries us forward to this day. They are the people who built this party to where we are now. Local activists. Quite frankly, a number of the people I've met, both in the radical movement as well as Ruff Phillips 2020, and supporting other candidates as well. Bill Weld did not create the Libertarian Party. The successes we enjoy in the future, and we will enjoy some, as well as some challenges, will have nothing to do with Bill Weld. The old Irish saying, Don't let the door be hitting you on the arse on the way out. And I'd like to say that now to the entire well phenomenon. It's behind us. Now we must move forward, unite as a party. We can disagree. We can engage in that unique love-hate that exists only at Libertarian Party national conventions. But at the same time, we all believe in the statement of principles. I hope we believe in the non-aggression principle. And around that core, we get to start anew. But this time, we're going to do it the right way. Anyway, enough of that. It's behind us. It is with great pride that I introduce our next guest. He is Libertarian Fabulous. Edward L. Garrett is an activist with the Erie County of New York Libertarian Party. And in doing so, have taken activists to a level that I quite frankly envy. You see, just like in Rhode Island, and just like I would imagine many of the libertarians that are listening or will listen in a few days to this podcast recording, they believe in the right to bear arms and the right to self-defense. We all agree that it is a right so intrinsic to us as humans that we, in fact, can commit the most egregious crime in humanity, that is to take someone else's life, justifiably if it's in one's own self-defense. We have a Second Amendment not because we want to protect sports hunters, not because we want to protect people at handgun sites or people who want to own weapons from World War II. We have a Second Amendment to codify, once and for all, the right to bear arms in case there's a rise of an oppressive government. That's why we have a Second Amendment. So, first of all, Edward, I want to thank you for coming in tonight. Thanks for working through those technical difficulties. But tell us about, which we always like to do every week. First of all, tell us about your spiritual libertarian journey, a little bit about your background, and then let's talk about a court case that you folks are battling through the New York State court system with.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I guess about myself and my background. I grew up as the son of a conservative family. With a lot of libertarians. I grew up in a household of mostly Republican, conservative Christians who believed it was our duty to serve our country, who believed very much in that patriotism. And I joined the Air Force when I turned 19. I spent 4 years, and by the time I got out, I had observed enough government malfeasance and misappropriation of funds and other various activities that were less than wholesome, shall we say, of the United States government, of the Air Force in particular. But that isn't really what brought me to libertarianism. It was the understanding that the Republican Party was just as morally bankrupt as I've been accusing the Democrats of being for years. In particular, noticing that the Republicans like to talk this big game of let's support our troops and let's take care of our troops. And when it comes down to it, they don't care about our troops, not at all. Not unless they can use them to get another profit-making war started. That was what pushed me into libertarianism. And at that point, it was kind of when I started doing some of the things that you were talking about in the earlier part of your podcast, when you were talking about building at the affiliate level. That's what I started doing. Because here in upstate New York, we didn't have a whole lot of affiliate level organization done yet. And I worked actually, that was when I first met Kim Ruff, where at that time she was called Kim Richards. And she was building a chapter in the neighboring Niagara County. And we kind of assisted one another in the building of our respective chapters, as well as Andrew Colston, who I want to mention, working in Chautauqua County. And the three of us, building our separate chapters in our separate counties, worked together to help that organization. No one had really done that in the New York Party, at least not in the upstate, for a long time. It really needed someone to come in and be that organizational leader and get things going again. Yeah. So I suppose that's part of my journey that led me to file the lawsuit on the Second Amendment, along with Jim Ostrowski. Jim Ostrowski is our attorney, who's also supporting Ben Wassel, the veteran who was the first victim of the New York State Act, which I'm sure you've probably heard of in Rhode Island.
Right.
The draconian gun law that makes mincemeat of our Second Amendment rights here in the state. The state is very, very anti-Second Amendment.
Yeah,
so
talk
forward a lawsuit like this in the state is a big deal.
Now, and let's give folks kind of a snapshot of upstate New York in terms of its politics, because so many people think of New York, obviously, as, Midtown Manhattan. And New York is a very complex, diverse state economically, socially. I mean, it just, there's manufacturing bases, there's rural economies, there's entertainment economies. It's perhaps, it's clearly one of the two most complicated states in the nation. What's it like to advocate for liberty in a state like New York with Andrew Cuomo as governor?
It's certainly not easy. We are a target from every angle. The Republicans don't love us. The Democrats certainly don't love us.
Mm-hmm. And what are the current gun laws on the books in New York?
Well, the current gun laws on the books are very, very restrictive indeed. In order to obtain a gun, you have to obtain a license from the state. Mm-hmm. The licensing process is arduous, it's expensive, and the state, after taking your money and making you wait and investigating your background and harassing your family and friends and conducting interviews, can decide for no reason whatsoever to deny you a permit. Mm-hmm. They can just say no, and they don't have to justify it at all.
Just for no other. And does this happen at the state level or the county level? Who actually adjudicates the permitting process for licensing a gun?
Well, insofar as who actually adjudicates it, I think that there are county and state agencies involved in that. I don't really know all the details of the process from start to finish. I can tell you that at one point I knew, but that was a while back. Mm-hmm. It's a long and complicated process. There are a number of bureaucrats and police agencies who review and have to sign off on this thing before you may be allowed to exercise your right to own a long gun or even a small handgun for your own personal protection in your own home. Mm-hmm. And they treat it like you're asking the government for some favor if you have to exercise this right for any reason.
Right. Now for years...
And we've had cases before. Mm-hmm. We've had cases before where people who have put in these applications for a gun permit for self-defense, mm-hmm. and they find out that they wait in the person who said that they need to defend themselves, either from a former enemy or a lover, they get murdered while they wait for the application process to go through.
Huh.
That's happened several times in this state.
Wow. Now, in terms of transporting guns, if you're from another state in New York, my understanding is it has to be broken down completely. It has to be in your trunk. And for years, New York has had a law where if you were caught with an illegal gun, there was a mandatory minimum criminal sentence. Is that correct?
That is very much correct to my knowledge. I don't know about the details of breaking down. So far as I know, transporting a gun in any state across the state line is considered to be a very serious crime in this state indeed. Okay. I don't understand why that is, but that's the way they treat it. They call it a nuisance weapon, quote unquote.
Okay. Now, this is actually your second step in the trial process. What law specifically are you challenging, and what is the state contending as their justification for limiting your right to bear arms?
The specific law we are challenging is a very old law indeed. It is a 1913 law, the Tammany Hall era law that allowed the state to basically have total discretion and no oversight in the granting of permits in the state. So the law is called the Sullivan Act.
Okay.
And that is the specific law that we're challenging in court.
Now,
if you'd like, I can send you a copy of the brief so that you can just like.
I've read through it a little bit. What was it that the state, and essentially the state won the first round, right? What is the state's contention on this law as to how this overrides the Second Amendment's right to bear arms? That's I guess what we're kind of confused with. How is the state rationalizing this?
I don't exactly know how the state rationalizes it, and I reached out to our attorney, Jim Ostrowski. He did not have the opportunity to get back to me, unfortunately. He's very, very busy with the Ben Waffle case.
Right.
But we are taking it to the appeals court in downtown Manhattan. That's going to be on the 20th of this month.
Right.
It's going to be at the George Thorogood Marshall Courthouse in Manhattan. Mm-hmm. Where we will be having this case heard.
Mm-hmm. And what? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The next step after this, if we don't have a satisfactory outcome here, is that we do plan to pursue it as far as the Supreme Court.
The Supreme
that is in the plan.
All right. So the court that you're going in front of right now, this is New York State Court.
This is the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in downtown Manhattan.
Okay. And then, at that point in time, you feel you have, you have a strong enough case to challenge it at the Supreme Court level?
Our attorney seems so, yes.
Okay. And this has got to be an expense.
And at this point, a lot of us who are on this case are doing this because we're libertarians and because this is it's a strong case, but we feel that it's worth the effort for the principle of the thing, you know?
Right. No, I understand. This has got to be expensive to do. How are folks financing this? Are attorneys working pro bono, or are you doing fundraising? How do you mount a case of this complexity and against such major opposition?
Our attorney has been working on this case for a while, and the several of us who got together have all contributed towards this effort. So I know that the attorney has taken a very large financial hit, putting many more hours on this case than he was paid for, and I cannot say enough good things about Jim Ostrowski for the work that he's done in this case and other related cases. Jim Ostrowski has really done the yeoman's work on defending the Second Amendment here in the state of New York, even though very few people, especially the judges or anyone in authority in New York, appreciate him for it.
No, absolutely. So, who will actually be testifying? Will anybody of the affiliate level be testifying, or is this strictly going to be argued out in the form of competing briefs and competing testimony with the libertarian judges? Libertarian attorneys.
From my understanding, it's going to be solely done with briefs. I haven't been told that I would be expected to testify. Mm-hmm. If I am asked to testify, I will, but I am not being expected to be asked. Okay.
So Attorney Ostrowski is carrying the water for this. When are you given a reasonable expectation of when you'll find out? In terms of results, is this something that's going? Are we looking at years or months? What do you think? What have they led you to believe?
Well, in the process of doing this to the Supreme Court, most certainly years. In the process of this appellate court, I don't exactly know what's going to happen. We'll know when the judge tells us.
Oh, okay. So that's just
how it is with government.
Absolutely. That's this week coming up. Your attorney thinks you've got a strong case. I want to talk about the Rough campaign coming up. Excuse my cold. You'll keep us posted on that as far as that goes. And right now, at this point, the attorney is actually doing a lot of this work pro bono. That's outstanding. Talk to us then about the election coming up. Now, are you formally part of Ruff Phillips 2020? Are you leaning that way? What's your thoughts on the presidential election?
I am acting as New York State Director for Ruff Phillips in 2020.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I am acting as the New York State Director for the Ruff Phillips 2020 campaign, and I'm very proud to do so because I know Kim personally, and because I know the hard work she puts in particular. I wouldn't support a candidate that I didn't think would do the hard work and would pound pavement. But Kim is exactly that person who pounds pavement, and I know because I've seen her do it. And I've seen her do it with Niagara County chapter. I've seen her put a few bucks in when she didn't have that extra few bucks to put in. And I know how that feels because I did it in my county. So that's the kind of dedication I would hope that any candidate for president the Libertarian Party elect would have. And maybe even if we ultimately don't nominate Kim as our POTUS candidate, I most certainly want to support Kim in the interim so that way whoever we do nominate has a very high bar to meet.
How important is it to you that we get away from this whole liberty light Republican history that we've got as a party? Where does that stand in your priorities?
Well, in my priorities, I would say that it stands as a good idea for our national party to move away from the notion, from the branding that we've got from the mainstream media of being the party washed up Republican. We need to get rid of the public perception of our party because our party is so much more than that. And we really, I've explained this to many people, if you think that the government is doing things wrong, if you think that we need a major change and that people need to be more free, then the Libertarian Party is your only option. The Democrat and the Republican parties are so hopelessly corrupt that you don't need a 1,300-page long book that explains to you in clear detail just exactly how corrupt both parties are. But such a book exists. It's called Tragedy and Hope. It's written by Dr. Carol Quigley, a Georgetown professor. But I mention that because it's so incredibly corrupt that there actually exists such an encyclopedic book that explains it. And then when you get into the Green Party, they're talking about things like Medicare for all, and they've been talking about this Green New Deal since before AFC did. As a matter of fact, the Green Party candidate for governor has been talking about that here in New York State for a while now. And then there's the Constitution Party, or as they might better be called, the Replace the Constitution with the Bible Party.
Right.
Because if you read the platform, they're all about Christian opinionism.
Yeah.
So there really is no other party with more than a few states worth of ballot access.
Right.
That's it. There's a voluntary association in the United States that actually advocate for real liberty. The Libertarian Party is it.
Right.
It.
Several folks.
Maybe we have problems and maybe we need to fix, but we're it.
Several folks on the recently departed ex-Massachusetts governor's campaign are attempting to portray folks who are radical libertarians, or as I like to say, real libertarians, as sort of the crazies. That somehow that we're just not, we don't dress well enough, I guess. That they point to us as being extremists. At what point in time do you think it became extreme to be a libertarian in the Libertarian Party? I don't understand it.
I want to say maybe 2006, 2008. Sometime around the Portland, Mass. Nomination of Bob Foster and Alan Root.
I guess. Let's go down the list of issues. I truly believe taxation is theft, not because it's a cute thing to say, but ultimately taxation represents the use of coercion to fund and finance experiments and adventures in government that I don't support. I mean, you're a veteran of the United States military, and I applaud that. What's always interesting to me is how many veterans make up the base of the Libertarian Party, and it's based on your intimate knowledge of the, again, misadventures that we have overseas, based on profiteering and privateering in something that's straight out of the pirates of the 19th century. I mean, we haven't invoked the War Powers Act. I don't think in my lifetime at this point. Except for I think Grenada maybe. Who knows? How urgent do you think it is that we nominate a candidate who is overtly libertarian on every single issue? How important is that given this moment in our party's history?
I think it's important if we want to make the projection of the Libertarian Party that we are a really libertarian party, that we do believe in the things that we purport to believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that it's the most critical thing. I think that what matters is much less the public face of the party and much more the support structure we built underneath whoever our nominee for president is. Mm-hmm. And you said so earlier in your broadcast about the affiliate level. That's really what I'm about, is building your local town, your local county. That's mm-hmm. what I initially connected with Kim over, was building on our local level. Mm-hmm.
Now
And I really do think that that's where the LP suffers greatest, is that we don't have a big enough base on the local level.
We tend to be obsessive about the national election. We put all sorts of money into it, and we're not even really presenting our virtues and our values. Out of all the other, now you mentioned obviously prominently in your life, because of your service to our nation, foreign policy is obviously a huge issue for you. What other issues do you support? Are you behind? Do you embrace? Are important to you, and as a result, important to the Ruff Phillips campaign?
Well, I would say that one of the biggest issues surrounding us, of course, is the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. And the war on drugs, not just in relation to the issue with cannabis. And cannabis is a big part of it, but it is not just cannabis. Because you know that cannabis has a multitude of uses for pain, for anxiety, depression, PTSD, all sorts of things that veterans in particular deal with quite a lot, but not just veterans as well. But with that said, the biggest problem when we're talking about the war on drugs is not just that we want to be able to smoke weed. It's not just that. It is that we are killing our society by putting 25% of its youth in jail. We're absolutely destroying our capability to build our nation in the future. And if we don't stop it, we'll come to a point where we have no capability to build our nation, because our nation will be a nation of convicts.
Yeah. Has that been a particular issue in...
That may suit the slaver's private prison industry at the moment, but it certainly doesn't suit me.
Is that an issue that resonates well in Western New York? I mean, I've been to Erie County. I've been to that little area there right on the border with Pennsylvania and New York. Manufacturing in there and in Gary, Indiana, areas like that have been hit hard. Is the opioid epidemic as big an issue out there as it is here, and as a result, is that impacted public policy on the criminalization of drugs?
Well, yes and no. In the rural parts of Erie County and the far-flung corners of places like Springville, they don't pay as much attention to the opioid crisis, and they pretend it doesn't happen. It certainly does happen, but they like to pretend it doesn't. However, in the city of Buffalo in particular, we've seen some very, very big issues with the war on drugs. We've seen the Erie County Holding Center is packed with low-level drug offenders And in many cases, they're severely beaten, some cases beaten to death in those prisons. That's something that matters very much in the city of Buffalo, even if some of the rural counties act like that's not a problem. It is. And furthermore, there is a vast gulf between what the media and the establishments, the police union, the medical establishment. I'm an LPN, I'm a nurse by trade, but most doctors and most medical organizations, even though they know that cannabis is hugely medically beneficial, they don't back the legalization of cannabis because they know it cuts into their skin. The police unions are the worst.
Yeah, there's much money to be made in the war on drugs in terms of the militarization of our police and in terms of remediation. There's an entire cottage industry of people in this state, for example, where we live here in Rhode Island, a bunch of people who are essentially are paid to oppose weed. And the minute it finally gets passed, and it will, all of a sudden, they're out of business. So they're fighting tooth and nail with all sorts of misinformation. It's appalling to watch. What's the biggest
Very much the case in New York, too.
What's the single biggest economic issue impacting far western New York?
That's a good question. Now, I'm tempted to say, well, you know what, I'll just say it. The biggest issue impacting western New York are the failed economic policies of Andrew Cuomo. Okay. Right now, the biggest problem that we have out here, and most western New Yorkers will tell you if you ask them, is that everything that is done upstate New York, anything north of the Hudson River, is dictated mostly by New York City. And a lot of people say that that's just because New York City voters completely overwhelm and outnumber upstate. And while it's true that there are larger numbers in New York City, many of them don't vote. So the numbers actually even out. And a big part of the problem of what we have here upstate is voter apathy. Mm-hmm. How do you train a group of flies in a petri dish not to jump out? You teach them that it's useless to try. So that eventually when you lift the lid off of the petri dish, they don't bother jumping out anymore. That's exactly the problem that we have here in western New York. People have forgotten that they have legs and that they can fix their own situation, and so they stop trying.
How has the message of liberty resonated with younger people? You know, college age, young high school students, for example. Are they attracted to it, or are they confused by it?
I would say a mix of both. I have seen liberty be something that can be popular to people of all ages, younger and older folks. A lot of the people who are involved in the New York Party are seniors who have been doing this for a long time. And we very much are happy to have such long-time activists in the New York Party, people who've been a part of it for decades and decades. But we also love the fact that we have so many new people, so many young people. The college age group is getting very popular, and we have more and more student groups on the various campuses out here. On University of Buffalo campus in particular, there's a new YAL chapter that we're talking with. We can't coordinate too much, but it's interesting to see the interest in libertarianism grow and grow. We've certainly seen that a lot with Larry Sharp's campaign. I don't know how much you're familiar with Larry Sharp.
Larry Sharp, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, Larry Sharp came out and spoke at our state convention. So we're very familiar with Larry Sharp's message of positivity and independence and hope. New York.
I'm actually wearing my "Don't In Me, I Voted for Larry Sharp" shirt right now.
Excellent. New York is an astonishingly large state, particularly if you live in Rhode Island, where you're 44 miles north and about 25 miles wide. We're probably around the size of Brooklyn,
Yeah, Rhode Island is about the size, or is actually smaller than several counties in the state.
Absolutely. Oh boy, I apologize. I'm not usually this bad. how does it, you're going to be the New York coordinator. I'm not sure. Does New York have multiple time zones? I'm being facetious, but in the western part of the state, I mean, you're a full day's drive, just to get anywhere within the state. How many?
True.
Are you?
Especially going east to west in New York. This is a big, big state. It's not quite Texas, but it's close.
So, in terms of setting up shop for the campaign, and as I will repeat every week, what's most impressive, amongst many things to be impressive with Ruff Phillips 2020, is how far out ahead of the curve they are right now, and actually building an organization. In New York, are you going to rely primarily on these county affiliates in order to develop the campaign staff?
Well, that's my initial plan. Is that since I've been a county chair for a while now, I've been involved for the last 4 or 5 years. I know most of the other county chairs. I know most of the people on the state committee here in New York. I'm not necessarily friends with all of them, but they know who I am.
Right.
And we have a mutual respect for one another, even if we're not always happy with one another. And we have the opportunity to talk about the presidential campaign. Kim's name is not far from us ever, because even though she moved back to the state of Arizona, she never really left us. Kim has left an indelible and very positive mark on the New York Party. And we kind of remember her and what all she did, even though the county chapter ended up folding after she left. It was something incredible to see how quickly she was able to build it and rally those people in that county.
Interesting.
That was inspiring.
No. It quite frankly is, and like I said, the rapid buildup of this campaign is inspiring as well. If there's a message that you would like to give to New Yorkers, from the campaign, based on all your experience now living in New York for several years, the challenges that are unique to New York as well as the opportunities in New York, what message from the campaign do you think resonates or has the potential to resonate most with New Yorkers?
Well, I may not be the best person to come up with that message. Kim is. Kim is an incredible writer, and she's an incredible speaker. I am not. But I will say that what I've seen is that New Yorkers, like the rest of us, we're all in this situation where we see the tyranny, we see things going bad for us in our government, and we're not really sure why. We're never really sure who's to blame. And right now, lots of New Yorkers are blaming Donald Trump. And I would remind New Yorkers that we were dealing with plenty of tyranny before Donald Trump ever entered the political scene.
Right.
That would be my message to New Yorkers, is remember that tyranny doesn't necessarily bear a party label. It can come from the Democrats, it can come from the Republicans, it can come from Greens or Libertarians, it can come from anyone that you elect that doesn't match the values of freedom and will not defend those values of freedom.
Excellent.
So when you vote carefully.
Your votes matter, man. Voting counts. Has lifelong repercussions.
And in particular, don't simply choose not to vote. The people who choose not to vote are doing themselves no favor.
No, it's almost cliche, but you give up that right to really participate at any level on the issues that someday might become important to you long after you've abrogated your responsibility to vote. It's and karma's like that, and it absolutely is like that. All right, so we've only got a couple minutes left. How can folks in New York get in touch with you if they want to volunteer and support Kim Ruff, either financially or through volunteering, or maybe even both?
Well, Kim Ruff's campaign has there should be campaign pages for each and every state set up. If you're interested in hearing more about Kim Ruff, there's plenty of places to hear about it and plenty of places to message and volunteer. But in particular, I would say that if you're interested in the Kim Ruff campaign, be talking with your local county state level chapters, get people involved in talking about picking a libertarian nominee for president in 2020 that will be really libertarian. It doesn't necessarily have to be Kim. It can be anyone who will hold both parties' principles. And I think that Kim would be the first to say that if we have a real libertarian, even if it's not her, she'll be happy so long as we have a real libertarian actually defending real libertarian values and not endorsing our competition.
No, that's, yeah. Or denying. And from my own personal perspective, as annoyed as I was when he endorsed Hillary, I think that I was more upset that he refused to acknowledge that Gary was the best presidential candidate. Whether he believed it or not, and quite frankly I did, and to this day I support Gary Johnson very strongly. I think it's time for us to move on to a different candidate, but Gary Johnson's one of the reasons why I'm a libertarian now. He happened to be the delivery system for me. But Bill Weld...
I have a lot of great things to say about Governor Johnson. He did a lot of great things for the LP, but we can't expect any one person to carry the torch forever, whether it's Gary Johnson or Ron Paul. We have to be a better movement than be a one-trick pony.
Right. We can't let this descend into cult of personality. And so
Exactly.
Bill Weld's simple failure to acknowledge that Gary Johnson was the best candidate for president is something that will live with me politically forever. And I can forgive him for a lot of things. I can't forgive him for that. That to me was essentially Peter denying the third time. And I know New York's got a history with Bill Weld that stretches back a number of years. But at the same token,
yes, we do.
You're right. I mean, you folks were the canary in the coal mine. And people didn't listen, including me. And we should have. And even till now, people didn't listen. So I promised when I made my little speech at the beginning of your appearance that I was going to, how does the song go? Let it go, let it go. I'm letting it go. But as the same token, I think it's very important for us who consider ourselves truly libertarian that we don't allow this to happen again. And if it needs to be brought up from time to time, simply for that reason that we can't repeat that. We can't make that same mistake again. The movement can't survive too many Bill Welds. We barely survived this one. So, listen, I want to thank you for coming on tonight. I know we appreciate you working through us with some of these technical issues. I hope if life, you find your way down here into New England, you'll let us know. So we'd, like to raise a glass with you and have a bite to eat. And that goes for anybody who's a libertarian. If you're coming through Rhode Island, please look us up. Please give us a holler. We've got events going on, throughout the month, and we'd love to host you. And you kind of share in that. Being a northeastern libertarian is a challenging task, and if there's there's an element of the Christians in the Colosseum aspect to it, you're not far off. So, thanks for coming on tonight, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Folks, my voice has finally left the building. So before I descend into sound like I'm a refugee from a tuberculosis ward, I will just say this. We are the Coalition. We are, as always, loud and proud. We are outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network. If you're listening to this show for the first time, we thank you. And we ask you if you could take a moment and like us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. Maybe follow us on Twitter at Coalition_radio. And, of course, visit us whenever possible at coalitionradio.us. Folks, have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Friday.